right.
Oh, okay. Welcome back, everybody. I'm Mercedes Paulmeyer, your host of Modus Cafe, and today I'm joined by Steve Bechtel again, and we've got a new kind of format or topic that we're going to try to roll today. This is our first time doing a format like this. We're going to be looking at a research study, and the topic really is about reimagining what strength and endurance training can look like, that maybe we don't have to lift as heavy to get strong, and maybe we don't have to do as many repetitions to get pure endurance. And so the research study we're going to look at today is maybe going to shine some light on something that I think both Steve and I have maybe argued against training this way. So this is going to be interesting. Steve, hello.
How are
How's it
you?
going?
I, I'm doing great, and
Yeah.
I'm really excited about this, especially since you and I both read the research. We're really interested in continuing to educate ourselves and into really asking other coaches and self-coach climbers to continue to think about the development of their thought processes when it comes to building training.
Yeah.
And so this is really exciting, and one of the main reasons I wanted to start with this study is because it, just like you said, it kind of flies in the face of one of my main assumptions when I started building strength programs years ago. And in fact, I presented last year at the Canadian Sports Medicine Conference on this specific thing, which was building a strength continuum. And a lot of what we are seeing in this study and the studies that support it is that maybe it's not quite as strict as I thought it was, and I might get better results by changing some things a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah. So let's talk about this study. So really what Steve decided, he actually sent me the study. We had a quick back and forth through email saying, okay, this looks like a really interesting study to talk about. We are not trying to defend this study, but really it's about rethinking how we train our athletes, and for you listeners, like how else you can train your strength and endurance. So the topic, or the title of this study is 8-week lat pull down resistance training with joint instability leads to superior pull up endurance performance and reduced antagonist coactivation in recreationally active male college students. This is a study done by Chen Li, et al., everybody else. Um, yeah, and basically, so they looked at 8 weeks of instability training specifically for the lat pull down machine. And they looked at, but they brought in 34 male college students. They were recreationally active college students. We don't, they might have said what their age is, but we're assuming that they're college age. Um, so that's the topic. So Steve, do you want to talk a little bit about their, like how they went about the study?
Yeah, it's actually a fairly well designed study, and this is one of the things we have to look for when you're reading science. Is it a study that's based on 8 people or 4 people, or is it on anecdotal? How often did they test the subjects and all kinds of things? And this is a generally pretty well designed study, and it also lines up with some other studies that have been done in the past that weren't quite as specific, but showed basically the same things. And there are two things that they really discovered in this, but the main thing that they were trying to look at was a destabilized pulling variation versus a more stable pulling variation. And both groups of athletes did an 8-week intervention of training 3 times a week, and both of them saw big increases in strength. And so I think that this is a really important thing, is that these athletes did 24 training sessions and they all got stronger. And this is really important for all of us to remember and emphasize. is that strength training works. And if you do long-term planned strength sessions, you'll get stronger. And so if you're not doing strength training at all, just doing 8 weeks of progressively overloaded strength training will be where you would want to start, because you'll get quite strong in that amount of time. What they compared was a stable variation of a pulling exercise, holding onto a bar, both hands on a fixed bar so your hands are kind of attached together, versus looping elastic bands on that bar and then pulling down on those elastic bands. And so the bar was a little unstable. The bands gave way a little bit. And what was the most interesting thing in this study, and even though the elastic band athletes used lighter loads because of the instability, they had to activate the stabilizing muscles in order to control the bar. And they're assuming, and what normally my assumption would be like, if we destabilize the movement, we can't generate as much force, and so we'll see a lesser increase in strength. But what this study showed, and what other studies before it have showed, is that if we destabilize that athlete, they learn to deal with this unstable environment and slowly decrease the coactivation of the antagonist. They quit using their shoulders and triceps as much as they go through the program. And they then are able to put more energy, more neurological percentage into the lats, into the pulling muscles. And these athletes actually got stronger with lighter loads. The most relevant part of this was through a strength training style program, they actually saw an increase in their endurance. And you and I both talked about this for years. Stronger athletes tend to have better endurance. If you wanted to get better at high rep pull-ups, you should do heavy pull-ups. And this kind of reinforces that same thing. In fact, the destabilized group is at 45%, Mercedes. They saw a 45% greater increase in their muscular endurance compared to the stabilized group. And so that is a super cool result. Mm-hmm. And it's another thing that we can just take to the bank, that bouldering, strength training, getting good and strong at the movements bleeds out into our endurance in a really, really great way.
Yeah. Yeah. And so actually, when you said this to me, I was like, oh no, we're going to talk about unstable training, which I know other strength coaches might pull out the pitchforks and say, no way, you shouldn't be training on unstable surfaces or using instability to get as strong as possible. So this is really interesting. It definitely goes, like, I feel like when I first started doing strength and conditioning, there was kind of maybe a drive towards some unstable training. And then that kind of got thrown out. I feel like I haven't really seen that in a long time. And honestly, just a lot of hate around unstable training. And now it's like, yeah, with the study and like a bunch of other studies that they've referenced in this study are really just showing like, actually, we're coming back around to it.
Yeah. Well, there are a couple of studies that are interesting that are cited in this one. One is Cureus was the lead researcher, and that one they saw an increase in swim sprint times with heavy pull-up training. And like, okay, that makes sense. I'm doing 50 or 100 meters, and strength is closely associated with power. But then the Stork research, it was a 2017 paper. I would say this one needs to be backed up and looked into a little more closely. This was an undergraduate paper, and so it's probably not super well designed. But what they did see was that the people that did heavy pull training saw an increase in 400 meter times in the pool. And I think it's a really important thing to underscore where we have commonality there, that like pulling hard and with pretty high loads is probably what all of us are looking at trying to improve on. Nobody's saying let's lift at 30% of our max for hundreds of reps in order to build bouldering strength. We all are on the same page, but I think that you and I agree with some of the people that are more based in the powerlifting and then heavy lifting fields, where you're like, it seems like if I went to really, really heavy loads, that would be the very best thing. But this research is suggesting that slightly destabilized with slightly less loads might let us see the similar increase in strength, a clear increase in muscular endurance, and we may reduce the risk of injury that would be associated with going super, super heavy. There's also a risk of injury that comes with destabilizing movement. But if we're careful about moving into these destabilized things and we don't go way far into the crazy destabilized zone, I think that there's probably a place for it. And it's a thing that as climbers and the group of people that we're speaking to, we could try it with one exercise, try it with 2 exercises for a few months and see what happens.
Yeah. Yeah, and I'm sure there is a tipping point where an exercise can become too unstable and then not really lead to the gains that we're looking for. So we're not saying go crazy with this. I think some people have seen the resistance, like the resistance ball, and trying to do, I don't know, a squat on a resistance ball. Like that's not gonna make you that much stronger. It's a fun party trick.
Yeah.
But yeah.
Yeah. It's, I came up with a joke, but I'm not going to say it. What's important is a little instability is probably really good. And then if we go too far, it's probably going to be really bad, right? If we're really using loose bands and big ranges of motion and we're jumping explosively out of control, of course not. But I think if we're talking about just the pull-up exercise, the way that they did it in the study was heavy elastic bands. I think they look like about 1-inch bands tied to a pull-up bar and doing pull-ups on those, doing pull-ups on rings, doing pull-ups on a hangboard, which is in and of itself a destabilizing environment compared to a bar. All of those things, towel pull-ups, that's kind of what we're talking about here. We're not going into something where we have no experience. We haven't worked our way up into it. I would say take your normal pull-up, do it on a set of rings instead. Eventually you can maybe add load, or you can move the rings further apart. You can, make them uneven. But I think that it's something that's worth pursuing, especially if you're not seeing the improvements you would like to see with your current program. And that's where we always start, right? Like, do exercise at all. And once you're exercising, do organized exercise. And then once organized exercise plays out, then you can start to look at the subtleties and changing things and bar speed and isometrics and things like that. But if you're not really training, it's not worth moving into these more complex interventions.
Yeah, totally. Well, that is like, I think maybe going into some practicality, like what you were talking about, like what people can potentially do. And I do think like rings training, like that's actually how I started all of my upper body training was actually on rings. I would do push-ups on rings, pull-ups on rings. I tried to do muscle ups. And I would say in general, it seemed like I got pretty strong, but it was just because I was doing it often. But I really like the rings compared to a fixed pull-up bar because it just seems better on my joints as well. So there seems to be almost like a therapeutic aspect of adding a little bit of instability. The other thing that I'm curious about, I don't think the study mentioned this in like maybe the drawbacks, but because you have to hold the resistance band in a way like it's smaller maybe than the actual bar, that you're also working some grip strength in there too. So it's like almost a double whammy of improvement, especially if you're doing like towel pull-ups for climbers. Like that's a great way to get a different position in your wrists as well. Yeah.
I think that makes a ton of sense. And one of the things that is never a limiter for me in the weight room is my ability to hold on to a bar. But I think that we want to continue to make sure that that's not a prime limiter. Like if you really can't hold on to a deadlift bar or a pull-up bar, and and we need to use artificial aids like wraps to hold on to that thing, that's a failure of the kinetic chain. And I understand if you just all you care about is picking up that heavy barbell, wrap your knees, wrap your waist, wrap your wrists, do whatever it takes, lift up the heavy barbell. But I think it's a really great thing. Like if you're barely able to hang onto the pull-up bar in pull-ups, that really may be the limiter rather than your shoulders, your lats, or anything else. And so this is a
Mhm.
really good way of integrating those things. And I think that's part of this is that integration of multiple things helps us learn to activate in these correct patterns. If
Yeah.
you watch really high level climbers, they're quite relaxed in the muscles that they're not using for particular movement. If you watch 20-year-old frat guys at the crag, they're usually climbing locked off and paddling their feet, and they're exhausted by the end of even a very, very easy climb because they haven't learned to relax those antagonists. They still have this really high level of co-contraction. And so I think the more that we do introduce this instability and integration through the kinetic chain, the more it starts to apply over to our real world environment.
Mhm. So if athletes were like, cool, I'm sold, I'd like to try this. Um, do you think this could be in addition to, so that you could still do your heavy pull-ups, like trying to go for like two reps heavy pull-ups, 2 to 5, and then maybe on a different day doing something more like this where it's a little slightly higher repetition? What was their repetitions in the study?
Oh man,
And I think it was
I read
four
this.
set. It was
Yeah,
like 4 sets of 8. Oh man, hang on, I have it here.
I read this one and the two other studies
Yeah,
closely associated with it at the same time. And I can't remember which.
yeah, it's hard to keep track.
They're all relatively in the realm. But these guys did more repetitions than I would normally do for strength training because I think
Yeah,
it was 4 sets of 12,
that's
um,
right. Yeah,
which is also kind of cool to see an increase in strength from that.
yeah,
Um, so um, the one thing I would say, Mercedes, would be if we are doing weighted pull-ups and these at the same time, um, we may not know which worked to make us stronger.
yeah,
So I think it's okay to take a risk and go, I'm just going to do this one kind of training.
yeah,
And then I'm going to assess it. Um, I'm so often into the like pretty soon I add one more thing and one more thing, and then I've got like 9 things going that I'm trying to track and progress, and then all of a sudden I kind of get lost in the whole thing. And so one of the things I end up doing when I get like plateaued or not making any progress is go back and go, I'm only going to make one primary intervention, and it's going to be this thing. And
yeah,
in this situation, I would say, let's get rid of all of your pulling exercises except for this destabilize thing, and attack that one pretty hard.
mhm,
And with the same caveats that we always give, if it feels like it's hurting you, you need to back off. If it feels like you're trying to progress too much, you need to back off. We need to learn how to do this exercise. So we start with much lighter loads than we did with our weighted pull ups. But I think if any of the athletes did 8 weeks or 12 weeks of 3 days a week of pulling, they may see just incredible improvement right there, and we don't even need to
yeah,
destabilize them. So
yeah, totally. And actually, in my last member call, like every month, I have a membership call with my athletes, and someone did actually say they were sold on not having to do endurance pull-up training. That they see so much more out of doing heavier pull-up training as opposed to just doing more and more repetitions.
yeah, the especially with upper body endurance stuff. And again, we once in a while we kind of get into this. Well, running is like this, like a lower body endurance thing, but running is so incredibly high repetition compared to endurance rock climbing. I think people will take a 2,000 steps a mile when they're running, and a 1 mile run isn't much of a run. And so there's no climbing where we're doing 2,000 repetitions nonstop. Um,
Mm,
like real world rock climbing, maybe in a gym or something you could. But
yeah.
you're right. And what I like there is there are a few interventions, but going heavier and heavier, and maybe even doing more sets of heavy pull-ups, but without going to that long duration can be really useful. Um,
Hmm.
the the timed pull-up sets, and we've talked about this before. We talked about it last spring. We were talking about our strength stuff. Are really useful in that way. And with this, we do 2 reps on the minute for 15 minutes at a load that you can maintain for the entire 15 minutes. So that ends up being 30 reps. If I can do that whole thing really easily, then I can add a little bit of weight, like 5 pounds for the next workout. Again, I have to handle all 15 sets easily before I add more load. And then I can add load again. But you build a tremendous amount of 30 reps is a lot of reps of strength training, build a tremendous amount of capacity. And what's really interesting is you can take and have an athlete do as many pull-ups as they can at body weight before this intervention. And then if they do it for 10 or 12 or 15 workouts, you can then have them do as many reps as they can at body weight again without ever doing one workout that involved endurance pull-ups. And that number will increase substantially. And
Hmm.
that's a really cool way of getting more endurance without having to like burn against it. Because that is
Yeah.
like pull-ups to failure. If you can do a bunch of pull-ups, it's a pretty miserable experience.
Yeah. And it does, you do get a lot more out of training strength. Like the ripple effect of training strength bleeds out into so much more than just training endurance on these movements. So I think for climbers it's really, really important.
Yeah, muscular endurance can be really taxing on your connective tissue. It's really metabolically taxing. It's very challenging just to recover from a big day of high reps, and
Yeah.
um, and so that's a really important aspect of the strength training too. Is that I can do these sessions more often and feel like I can do them again the next day and the next day and the next day, and I can see
Yeah.
good improvements from them. The
Yeah.
with hangboarding, I'm really sold on doing like 2 positions for just a few sets in a workout. So very, very short finger strength workout, because the next day I can come back and I'm like, okay, that feels good. I'll go again. Instead of like my historical favorite, which was like 23 hand positions at 4 different elbow angles until failure on each position, like trying to throw all of my climbing improvement into a hangboard session. And
Hmm.
but when we just look at pure numbers, lower volumes, more frequent, tend to come forth as a great intervention for people that has a low risk of injury. And we
Yeah.
always have to think like reducing our chance of being injured and reducing and increasing the number of great days we have out there are the two primary things we want out of training.
Yeah. Awesome. Was there anything else out of this study or anything else we want to caveat?
Well, I think that the conclusion that they came up with is important to understand, because a lot of people are like, why is this?
Mm.
What's happening here? And basically what they said is when we reduce the activity of the antagonists, there's not as much co-contraction. And when we need co-contraction, it's me holding my shoulders stable, flexed while I'm pulling, because I'm trying to go really, really hard, or I'm trying to lift too heavy a weight, or I have too little experience with the movement. Um, as I reduce uh, the need for that co-contraction, there's more neurological drive to the prime movers. And so what they're seeing is with this lighter load, there's more neurological drive. The prime movers learn to move more effectively, and we can gain strength more quickly in that way. And so it's a really important aspect of this, destabilizing it slightly, making it slightly different than the environment that we've trained in before is the place that we want to start.
Mm.
And then when we go, like get through with our 12 weeks, it's probably not wrong to go back to a stable pull-up bar, throw the weight belt on, start pushing heavy loads again. Again, you and I aren't trying to sell this. We're just curious about it. it again kind of goes against a lot of the planning that I used to make. I used to say we're going to go super heavy at very stable, then we'll go a little bit lighter at a little bit less stability, then we'll go really light and really unstable, and then we're going to go back. And so we played through this
Mm-hmm.
continuum, but we may
Mm-hmm.
not need the whole continuum. I know a lot of
Yeah.
people that are very, very strong that never lift weights.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. Well, I do wonder. Well, one, I do want to say that um, that it is a neurological efficiency. So that means you're just going to be generally more efficient by not having to recruit as much antagonist muscles when you're moving. So just kind of wrapping that up. But I'm curious now, like maybe what a lower body exercise could look like, because when I think instability, the first thing I think of is a Bosu ball,
Yeah.
and like maybe doing squats, a kettlebell squat on a Bosu ball. Maybe that's not it. Maybe that's maybe too unstable. But in a rehab context, maybe not.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
I think anytime that we're in a split position or we have uneven loading, we could probably get the same effect. Um, I love the rear foot elevated split squat. Um, it changes the loading. It ends up having about 70 to 75% of the load on the front leg, and the back leg, which is on a bench, or if you've got a rear foot elevated split squat machine or a implement, which is basically like a rolly pad that you can put your ankle over. It makes it a little more stable. But that's a little bit hard on my balance. I can still push a pretty heavy load, but I see some pretty good strength gains there. And it makes sense in terms of the fact that at no time in the sport of rock climbing do we push on the same level surface with both legs at the same amount of force. It has never happened one time in the existence of the sport. And
Mm-hmm.
so it's really important if we do a rear foot elevated split squat, a step up, walking lunges, all of those things are destabilizing. We use slightly lower force, but I can come out of a big long season of doing single leg strength and still have a pretty solid back squat without ever spending time doing back squatting. Whether that actually is really improving my leg strength to the maximum it could possibly be, I don't know. But I don't need to be able to lift 500 pounds in a deadlift, 400 pounds in a back squat in order to be able to boulder V5 or whatever.
Yeah.
I really just need to be strong enough to do what the sport requires. And the sport requires some level of leg strength, but not a tremendous amount. So I would just say
Yeah.
destabilized or a single leg variation would be really good. I wouldn't put myself on something that requires a like reactive balance, like a Bosu or a
Mm-hmm.
football,
Mm-hmm.
because then you're going to start to be afraid of adding load, because it's flat dangerous to do that. Where rear foot elevated split squat, not a dangerous exercise.
Yeah. Yeah, I really like the one I've been doing recently more often is the tripod. Actually, no, not tripod. Kickstand RDL.
Mm-hmm.
Where like single leg RDLs are there's just too much of a balance component. Like
No.
that doesn't feel like it's actually improving my overall strength. But the kickstand one for sure, because it's almost like the Bulgarian split squat where you're able to at least get some stability from the back leg and still lift decently heavy
Yeah.
by favoring the one leg. So that for me, and even just like my back rehab, like that's been pretty solid and it feels really good
I
in the
think
body.
yeah, that's a brilliant.
Yeah.
We've
Yeah.
also done single leg deadlifts and single leg Romanian deadlifts just with the shoulder against the wall, and so,
Mhm.
so you've got something to kind of track against. So you can put your elbow out, and the main thing there is like, is this a balance exercise or is it a strength exercise? We do want to push more toward that strength side, and so I think those are
Yeah.
variations.
Yeah. Yeah. You're not cheating by trying to stabilize against the surface.
Right.
Yeah. Hmm.
So yeah, so again, I think it's worth trying. I think it's there's some athletes that are injured or are at risk of injury by going too heavy on loading a certain exercise. Could we go to a single leg variation? Could we go to a destabilized variation? still pull pretty hard or still lift pretty hard with their legs, but not go into that risk zone, it's probably a home run for the athlete that's worried about bringing back an old injury or
Yeah.
hurting somewhere that they'd had surgery, that kind of thing.
Yeah. Yeah. That's awesome. And I do want to reiterate that as climbers, we're not trying to become powerlifters. Like, that's not our job. Our job is to get really good at climbing and then supplement with strength training. And really, we're just trying to find out and experiment with, one, what do we know from our so many years of experience training athletes, while coupling that with what the research is showing. We can't always rely on research, but it is a good guideline for us.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I think it's a fun kind of discussion to have. There's so much
Yeah,
interesting stuff. I look forward to chatting with you more about this.
yeah. And I think if any listeners, if y'all have research studies that you want us to talk about, I think that could be really fun. We could kind of like dive into some other research that people are maybe looking into. I don't know how many people read research. I'm curious from our listeners if you read research on a regular basis, but definitely let us know. All right. Well, thanks so much, Steve.
Yeah,
This was
thanks.
awesome. We'll definitely do
You.
it again.
Okay, I'll
Yeah.
talk to you here soon.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye.